Good morning. We're glad you're here with us. If you are a guest among us, like has already been shared with you earlier, we pray that you felt hospitality, you feel the warm welcome. Fill out on the folder at the sides your name and contact info. We'd love to get to know you a little bit. We got quite a few folks who are out this morning. We already have a number of people who are already left for Bandina, and just because I'm a Facebook stalker and I'm trying to figure out what everybody's doing, I know a number of other folks who are out of town. Hey, Walter's back. How was Disney World? Really good? Is that all right? That's awesome. So it's the summer. It's traveling. We got lots of folks going to different places, and we recognize that that's just what it is. And if you are here traveling through, we just want to especially welcome you. This is the beginning of a new series, and so we're looking forward to spending some time in some parables, and so we will be in Luke chapter 15. Already mentioned was Lynn and also Dee Fowler. We need to keep our prayers. I forgot another person that we need to mention is also Becky Danchek. She's also not feeling really very well this morning, and so we need to pray for her as well. Joe texted me this morning, and he was unable to be here this morning and said Becky had a pretty rough night. So we need to pray for the Dancheks as well. And then, of course, we're thinking about our kids. Earlier this week, Tara asked me, so what are you going to be preaching on this week? And I told her Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son. And she knows that to be one of my favorite stories. She made the honest point, though. She said this. She goes, that I'll most likely go pretty easy on the younger son and get pretty hard on the self-righteous older son. And so it's really not hard for me to admit that my wife is usually right. And the point is, right, that we often categorize the story as a kind of a religious coin. On one side of the coin, we see this rebellious, maybe even Gentile, sinful person that God now welcomes. And on the other side of the coin, we see, well, maybe a Pharisee, a legalist. And then you flip the coin, and well, the Pharisee and legalist never wins the toss. The truth is, though, I think this story is about two messed up sons, hence the title, The Prodigal Sons. But more importantly, the story is really about a father dealing with sons who had faults. So if it makes sense for you to categorize the two sons, that's fine. But I think it goes a lot deeper than just rebellion and legalism. For example, in a couple months, we're going to be talking about what makes a good church leader, a local church leader. We're going to be preparing the way for teaching and other resources for the fall elder selection process. And for this sermon, I'd like to think the father in this story is maybe one good place to find characteristics and qualities of a really good local church leader. So the story begins in Luke chapter 15, I think right around verses 11. There was a man with two sons. And so let's talk about the first son. The first son he asked for his inheritance, which in reality just does not happen. You see, the Luke author in this story, when he makes this statement early on, the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me a share of the property that will belong to me." And so he decided to divide his property between them. You have to understand, this just doesn't happen. You don't do that. If you ask folks from cultures like this, if even the son asked the father had every right to smack his son upside the head. And so this is essentially what the young son was saying to his dad. "Dad, I am no longer a part of your family. You might as well change my last name from Biesboer to Smith. I will never see you again." And as equally as shocking as that is, the father accepted that. So this is not a story about bad investing and poor spending, but more importantly about reckless abandonment of family. How easy it was for him to waste and spend all that his father had given him. He literally just completely gave up his entire identity. In short, the younger son was a selfish jerk. Already in the Gospel of Luke, you see Jesus is eating at the table with sinners. But what do you do with a guy that doesn't even want to be invited to the table? The younger brother spent all his money. He lived this reckless life. Maybe he thought he was unbreakable, that he could somehow go off and see the world. But the truth is, the world is a dark place, and there are things you can control, and there's things, well, you can't control, and famine hits the land. And so here we have, he's no longer a son. He's lost everything. Circumstances he can't control, like famine, has hit the land. He's dying. He's literally dying and starving. He is a dying, starving, homeless person with nothing to give you in return except a wrinkled up nose and that awkward glance we often give those people. So if you're the younger son, do you choose to die with pride? Or do you take this vulnerable position and go back to your family? You have to understand it's really not that easy of an answer. Because the most common response, if you're listening to the story, the most common response will be when you go back in your position to your family, they will reject you and you will die regardless. So, do you die with a little bit of pride? Or do you die with transparency and humility? If I'm honest with you, I know what choice I would choose. You see, I can't imagine being so rejected, an outcast of society, and yet you suffer so much. You are willing to go to the one place that could actually make you feel worse. That's where the younger son was. And folks, maybe in one sense, there's a confession here for churches. I mean, how do we respond as churches to people in the darkest moments? We have a chance to embrace them, or we have a chance to make them feel worse. First son. Second son. Now there was an elder son in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked, "What's going on? Why wasn't I invited to the party?" So he called one of the slaves and he asked this, and he said, "Look, your brother has come. Your father has killed the fatted calf, and he is serving fillets because he got him back, and everything is now safe and sound." Now, unless his father owned 1,000 acres, though I doubt it, I always wondered why the father began the party without inviting his older son. That seems actually kind of offensive. I remember when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and one of my best of friends had a birthday party, but he could only invite a few kids. And I was not invited to the party. I was devastated. It broke my heart. But I don't think this story, and I don't even think his true anger is found in the lack of an invitation to a party. That's just a surface thing, right? But here's the truth. When there is deep pain, when there is this deep struggle, we often get angry at surface things. I mean, that doesn't mean they're shallow. It's very justifiable to get angry when there's a deep anger at surface things. I mean, I get angry at church sometimes. I get angry over the way we do things around here. I get angry over what someone has once said to me or continues to say about me. Or maybe at home, right? I get angry over my kids or my siblings or my wife, or maybe they're not too silly, but they're still surface things. I get frustrated with my job. It seems pointless. I get mad with coworkers and employees and employers. I mean, the truth is, I suffer from anger sometimes, and the list goes on. But at the heart of that anger, there is this deeper pain. And we have to find that deep pain that older son is dealing with. You see, this deep pain isn't from the question, why wasn't I invited? You see, we don't want to say that the older son is lost. We don't want to say that he's also a prodigal son. But that's the truth of the story. It's a story of the prodigal sons. You see, he's given the opportunity to share in the joy and even maybe be pictured in the embrace with his father and his own brother when he returned. And yet, this hidden, dark pain emerges. Because here's the question for us. How can you be lost? I mean, if you're the older son, how are you lost? Especially when it's tied to your own obedience and loyalty to your father. That just doesn't seem to make sense. Henry Nouwen speaks this about the older son. He says, he grew up his whole life in the same home, maybe even the same church. And yet, where's the joy? Where's the excitement? The older son, he's the odd duck. He has this deep complaint of not feeling affirmed or getting what's due. Another way of putting it is I've been here a long time. I've been here all my life, and I'm still treated this way. I tried so hard. I worked so long, did so much, and yet I still feel it's not enough. Why do people not thank me enough, honor me, and lift me up? Here's the truth. This is where I recognize the older son in me. Feel affirmed, feel appreciated, be lifted up. So what's harder to face? Coming home after years of selfish lust, desire, and squandering all that you have, even squandering your own identity? Or living in a home you are familiar with, and yet have a deep resentment, emptiness, and anger? Truly, which one is harder to face? And that's why the story is about the father. He's an awesome dad. He's stuck with this unfortunate reality that his sons did not grow up to be ideal kids. Hard to imagine, really. Such a good parent, and yet his kids were lost. So what makes him an ideal father? And honestly, in this story, it's something really simple, and you probably wouldn't find it in any parenting book. It wasn't stability, comfort, or even hard work. It wasn't his willingness to let his younger son go out into the real world and experience that, nor was it his hidden pride in the older son following his footsteps. No, what makes this man a good father? He knows how to throw good parties. Let me explain. In the party, we get the opportunity to witness a father's joy, a touch, a sweet embrace, prepared food, the welcome and compassion. And so for me, reading the story like the older son, I also want to wonder what's going on here. I hear the music.
I smell the food. I see the laughter and dancing. But why? A party? Are you really going to award my younger prodigal son or brother, excuse me? Is there anything in the cake or music that at least gives some moral and doctrinal instruction? In many ways, we ourselves portray the elder son, but we're not simply some self-righteous legalist at all. We actually make some sense. You see, by welcoming my younger brother back, you endanger the standards that we've set in our home, in our church, and in our society. I mean, are you really willing to throw a party for my little brother? Which gets us to this painting. Matt, do you mind giving us this painting? Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son. This is one of my favorite pictures that depicts a story in Scripture. This is one of the final paintings of Rembrandt in the later years of his life. And this is the title, once again, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And you'll notice in the picture, it's kind of a dark picture. It's even dark this way, no matter how the way you look at it. But you'll see what? You'll see witnesses who have joined the party. In the background, you see kind of a face, don't you? And who is that? The older son. And then you see the dad, and you see the younger son. In the younger son, you see even a shoe that's missing. Maybe he has wandered for a long time, where no longer his shoes are even good enough to be worn. And of course, his robe, compared to everybody else's, is not bright, it's not colorful, it's tattered and broken. He has no hair. Maybe he shaved because he suffered from lice and other ailments that he has found, squandering all that he had. And yet, the Father, the good Father, welcomes the Son. But there's a catch to this painting, and I think it needs to be pointed out. You might not be able to see it from where you sit, but the Father has two types of hands. A soft hand and a hard hand. One that has seen maybe years and years of work in the fields, of a life filled with service, and another that is somewhat soft, nurturing, caring, and compassionate. The soft embrace and the hard embrace. And folks, that's the tension we still live in today. You see, the soft hand of God speaks of compassion and grace. I mean, are you like me, that older son in the back? Disappointed, shocked, bewildered? I mean, really, what just happened here? Grace happened. The kind of grace that only God can offer. A foolish and scandalous pardon. An act of mercy that should not and does not make sense. It screams, you don't deserve this. And yet God's grace grabs you, embraces you, and like the loving Father says, you've been lost, and now you are found. And then the right hand, the rough hand. It takes signs of hard work and service to be that type of dad. You see, with grace comes guidance and standards of morals and ethics. You have to know that grace and law are not an either or. In this story, the Father does not choose between the two sons. He does not say the rebellious is more loved than the obedient. He affirms his love for both. That's the good news. Fred Craddock, great preacher, says this about the parable. He says, table fellowship with sinners is no rejection of Pharisees. Perhaps the offense of the gospel in this story lies here. God is a both and God. God is a both and God. God embraces both Jew and Greek, slave and free, male and female, saint and sinner. The lesson in this story, for those of us that read this as a either or, we're offended by a God that is impartial, that is willing to throw a party for any person. And probably the most troubling thing about this story, the story does not end. Who does that? I've already shared with you my own position on movies that have awful endings. I mean, read the story. It just kind of cuts off. We don't know to what extent the younger son repents of his actions and stays with his family. Later down the road, does he somehow squeeze more money out of his dad and then once again turns around and squanders it? What about the older son? Does he live in resentment and bitterness his entire life? Is he just some angry dude that just needs to get over it? Or does his dad say, son, come join the party. Oh, and tomorrow, by the way, I'm going to throw you a party. But maybe, just maybe, it's the lack of closure that is an invitation for us to encounter God's full embrace, his welcoming compassion, his grace, his mercy, to receive his compassion, that soft embrace. Maybe it's also an opportunity for us, invitation for us to recognize that God calls us to a life of obedience, of service, and recognition that when we are a part of the family, that we have a life to live. The hard embrace. This is a God of both and, that says to all of us this morning, no matter where you are today, no matter where you are, this is a God that says, I throw the best parties. And all of you, every one of you, are invited. Come to the feast. Come receive your fatted calf. Come witness the fullness of God and be in the presence of a Father that will embrace you in ways that you have never been embraced before. Come to the party. You are all invited. Every single one of you. Doesn't matter where you are. Anger? Come on. Brokenness and sinfulness? You're invited. Witness what God has in store for you. And that is the gospel that we hear today. Story of the prodigal sons? Sure. More importantly, the story of a father who is willing to embrace you. This morning, if you are in desperate need for our God's embrace, we want to be a church that does that for you. If you want to be found by proclaiming Jesus as your Lord, to be buried and raised into newness and baptism, you can do that as well. And if you are someone who's looking for a church family, and look, we are not perfect people. As I've already stated, we are filled with prodigal sons, prodigal children. But we would love for you to be a part of our church family because we strongly have the confidence and faith that even though in many ways we act as prodigal kids, more importantly, we truly believe that God invites us and throws the best parties.